Good morning. Good morning, Nandini. Are you feeling nervous? No. Good, because you're with several thousand friends. So you shouldn't feel nervous if you're with friends. So that's the audience for today, a group of friends. The speaker this morning, Nandini Patnaik, is an old friend of ours, friend of the foundation. She has many qualifications. One is that she's a trustee and a manager of the Krishnamurti Center in Cuttack, India. And she has done many translations of Krishnamurti into Ojai. And probably her major qualification is that of being a teacher. She teaches English at college level in Los Angeles. And we're reminded of the fact that Krishnamurti said that teaching is a sacred profession. It is a noble profession. And teaching is a kind of communication that affects change. And so this makes her talk this morning doubly important. I'd also like to mention the fact that Nandini is the author of 3 rather remarkable books that present Krishnamurti in her own language, with her own approach. It's not traditional. The first, Beyond the Pathless, is Anecdotes from the Life of Krishnamurti. This book is a hefty volume and has many, many stories about the life of Krishnamurti, but presented in a way that a traditional biography wouldn't. So for a good read of the life of Krishnamurti, I recommend Beyond the Pathless. Another book is Living is Not a Choice. You, Me, and Krishnamurti. This is the most unusual of her 3 books because it's a collection of stories, original stories, that each one highlight a different dimension of Krishnamurti's teachings. And they're most engaging, and I recommend this book for young people who may not even be aware of Krishnamurti, but young people who want to read some serious classical literature. And the third is J. Krishnamurti, The Making of a World Teacher. This slim volume also has colored photographs and is an excellent overview of Krishnamurti's teachings. So from this volume, Nandini has quoted Krishnamurti on one of the major dimensions of the work of a teacher and the subject of change. That is for us as listeners. K. Your mind becomes astonishingly alert if you merely listen, not interpret what you hear, not try to translate what you hear, not identify what you hear with what you already know. All these prevent you from listening. But if you merely listen, listen to your thoughts, listen to your demands, to the despair of your being, not try to interpret it, not translate it, not try to do something about it, then you will see your mind becomes astonishingly clear. We are your listeners.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you for your kind words. Good morning from Pine Cottage, Ojai. It's a great honor for me to be speaking here today from this place, which is very sacred and venerable. Not only for the man who lived here and gave out his teaching, but the teaching is alive here. Anyone who is sensitive can feel the throbbing of the teaching, the possibility of the teaching still here. It's not a coincidence that as we are looking at a topic, the urgency of change, that the world is reeling under the pressure of many unexpected events and turns. Wherever we look, there seems to be something is wrong. So where do we look first? We open our eyes. There are about 10,000 armed conflicts going on right now. 2 million animals are killed and butchered every year to appease the appetite and the gratification of human beings. Death, hunger, poverty, they're quantified in superlatives and comparatives. And then we close our eyes. No matter how beautifully we decorate our house, our job, our small little community, still then, within the heart we see disappointment, frustration, anger, jealousy, running after pleasure, and avoiding pain. These problems are not new to the modern people, to us. They are as old as mankind itself is. Traditionally, people have tried solving these problems in various methods. The emperors, the kings have used force and coercion, waged wars to solve problems. Religious teachers have offered softer ways and tried to pacify people. Social reformists have tried changing the society so that people will change. In the modern times, we are taking help of organized thinking, pretending that our thoughts will change the predicament of human thinking and the human problems. Today we have the United Nations. More than 2,000 think tanks only in the United States. And there are philosophical teachers almost every other day on the virtual platform offering their ways how to solve the problems. But in spite of all our labor, effort, wish, desire, we are still in the same, back to the drawing board, and we are asking ourselves and each other, why are we not changing? So the first question is, why is change not happening? As we look at this question, we need to ask, what is the movement of change and what is the problem that we want to change? So the first question is, what is a problem? A problem is something that is happening over there. And the mind always externalizes problems. When we see something happening, it is a fact. It is what is. And the moment we see, we begin to react. We think something is wrong so that we can work on it. And that reaction comes from many, many years of observation, experience, value judgment. All these things have created our instant reaction to something which is happening, and we label it as a problem. If we like something, we don't want it to stop, we want it to continue. But if I don't like it, if we disapprove, we want an immediate change. So the beginning of change is in our reaction to what is happening. Then what we see, we want to create the opposite of what we see. That is the ideal. That is the what should be. And we want the what is to move into what should be according to our judgment, according to our wishes and desires. This what should be, the moment the mind is with what should be, with the ideal, it has already distanced itself from what is. We start with a problem, but very soon we are transported to the world of our imagination where things are ideal, according to our whims and desires. Then what is the next step? We think we can change the world by our ideas of what is, and therefore we try to move with the help of desire. Desire comes in. And when there is a desire, obviously we are moving further and further away. So the question is, the change is beginning with the movement of from what is to what should be. And how do we deal with our own problems? Everybody has problems. If the problems are small, personal, it is much easier to solve them. Like changing a doctor, changing our job, or changing a house. But how do we react when the problem is beyond me, beyond myself? It is in the society, or it is in my heart, in my mind. How do I change that problem? So the next question is, if there is a deep human societal problem, how do we deal with it? How do we react? So the very first step we need to see is that what we call a problem and a solution to the problem is actually a forever movement from what is to what we want it to be. And that what we want it to be is a process which invites time. We want it to happen in the future, so we start planning. And in the process of planning, many things enter, and the problem remains as is. We move further away. So to see that the whole flow of movement is just an illusion. No change is possible as long as we are moving away from the fact to the ideal, is the beginning of seeing the possibility. And that is the first step we need to take. So we see that the whole issue of change, which is so urgent, we just now discussed and said, is actually a flow chart from our disapproval of what is happening into the ideal of what should be. It looks like a vicious circle, and we are forever moving from problem and going away from the problem, but we are never meeting the problem. And the fact is that as long as we don't meet a problem, the problem is not going to be solved. So if we can stay with this question for a second and see, why do we always try to act on a problem? Why do we always want to do something about which is a fact? And the second thing is there another way of looking at a fact instead of trying to change it? If I may request, let's read quietly a little small excerpt from K on the screen. So what do we do when the house is burning? We jump into action because we want to save that little small structure which gives us security, safety. But what do we do when the whole neighborhood is engulfed in fire? No matter how much we pretend to save our small little structure, eventually it's going to catch fire. Now the neighborhood is burning. The city is burning. The whole world is burning. And any sane person, any serious person who sees this would definitely say there is an urgency of change. So, what is the significance of change? Haven't there been changes all down the history? There are changes in warfare. There are changes in communication, change in the whole system of entertainment industry, change in science, medical science. Then what kind of change are we talking about? When we talk about change, it means a little bit of modification, alteration, something on the surface, so that what has been is slightly shifted to a little bit different form. We always try to change only on the surface, only at the branches and at the symptoms level. We never look at the root of all the problems where there might be the cause and the source of all kinds of problems and disorder and chaos. So the question is, where are we to look if we want to see what is the root of all problems? The mind has a very typical tendency of externalizing everything. Whatever it sees, it always sees it at a distance so that it can act on it. Even the internal problems like anger, jealousy, greed, all these things are seen externally, as though there is somebody or it is possible to act, the mind can act on it. But if we look very closely and very intently, we find that all the problems of the outside world are created inside, in the mind of man. Greed, which is a quality of the mind, has created corruption in the society. Fear and the need for security, which are the qualities of the mind, have created the outside world of aggressiveness and offense. So everything begins from the mind, which actually is the root of all problems. Can we ask ourselves, just for a second, the question that is important: where is the source of all problems and what is the root of all problems? So the root of all problem is internal. The man inside and the woman, of course. The man inside is the world outside. The mind is the creator of all, the root of all problems. So what is this mind and why does it create all these problems? Is the mind separate, individual? As a biological or even sociological unit, human beings are separate from each other. I'm a doctor, I'm not a doctor, I'm a teacher, somebody else is a doctor, somebody else is a singer. People are different. But when we look at the very structure of mind, are we different from each other? That is the question. And if we are not different from each other, then what is the common content which makes everyone the same, similar, one? Is it the human consciousness? Now, what is the meaning of consciousness? Consciousness is a capacity to comprehend, to experience, to understand. And the common quality of all human mind is the human consciousness. What is in this consciousness? All the things we have learned, all the things we have experienced, all the things we have known in our lifetime, not only our lifetime, but the whole of the mankind, that is the content of consciousness. And when the content of the consciousness is gone, what is left? Which means the consciousness is made of its content. And if there is to be a change, unless it happens at the root, which is the consciousness, the change is never going to take place. So we are asking a question, more difficult question. Instead of changing the society and the individuals who live in the society, can we bring a change in the very structure of human consciousness? Because the mind is one and the consciousness is also one. So in order to bring the change in the outside world, the change has to start from inside. So the transformation in human consciousness is the only fundamental, radical, and structural change that we can talk about, that we can investigate. I said consciousness, but what characterizes consciousness? We know the content of the consciousness is the consciousness, that all we have gathered. But what characterizes consciousness? Isn't it conditioning? The basic quality of human consciousness is conditioning. What is that conditioning? It's a pattern behavior which has been going on for hundreds and thousands of years. So conditioning is basically a pattern which human beings have been observing and living according to for many, many years. And like any other pattern, it is non-intelligent because it is mechanistic. So as long as we are living in this mechanistic pattern of conditioning, we are bound to create the society which we have created. And the problems ought to be there. We cannot do anything. No matter how much we plan for a change, the change is not going to happen unless the conditioning of the human consciousness is transformed. So change is a very small and very light word. Transformation is something which completely disintegrates the structure so that the new is born. And this new is not out of the ashes of the old. It is the brand new. The question is, can that kind of total, radical transformation, mutation, which is a revolution, happen at the level of, not in the society, but at the level of the human consciousness? And human consciousness is one. It is not individualized as yours and mine. So if we can inquire for a few minutes, for a few seconds on this question, is consciousness individualized as yours and mine, or it is just one? And as we have seen, the human consciousness is heavily conditioned. And the question lies before us is, can the conditioned consciousness be transformed? Are we aware that our minds are heavily conditioned by each of our experiences and reaction to those experiences? And secondly, can we look at our conditioned mind directly without disturbing the conditioning? Because whatever we do to change the conditioning is again our reaction, which is not going to lead us anywhere. So, seeing that human consciousness, which is the human mind, is heavily conditioned, mechanistic, is pattern, which means non-intelligent, is the beginning of seeing possibility, and that is also the first step. So, is it possible that we see what is happening without desiring to change it? Is it possible to stay with what is the fact completely, so completely that there is not even the slightest turbulence in the mind that desires the opposite of what is happening? And of course, to look is the most arduous thing. Why is it so? To look or to listen, they're most difficult. Because what we see actually, they are not the fact. We just see the images of the fact. What prevents us from seeing the facts? That means, what are the roadblocks that block our perception of what is happening? And if we can see the roadblocks, not the images of the roadblocks, but the roadblocks themselves, then perhaps there is a direct relationship with the fact without coming to pretend and to imagine what the facts can be. The possibility of transformation can happen. So, what are the roadblocks? There can be many, many roadblocks, but in order to convey it in simpler language, I think the first roadblock is thought. Thought is the first and the most powerful roadblock that never allows us to perceive. Thought is always explanatory. Whatever we see, thought offers to explain the good, the bad, the right, the wrong, the better, the worse. So, whenever we see something, the thought immediately comes, interferes, and translates, interprets what we are seeing, offering solutions. So, what is this thought? Thought is a continuity. Thought is a movement. And the thought never wants to let go. It begins with a reference point and it moves on to carry it further on to another point. So the moment we look at something, thought interferes, comes in, and carries us along its way. Thought is also a movement of knowledge. Can there be thought if there were no knowledge, if there were no memory? It's not possible. And at the same time, we are not saying whether thought is right or wrong. We are just seeing what is the mechanism of thought. For living in this world as a human being, of course, we need thought and thinking. But for understanding the innermost factors that make the human mind, how much do we depend on thought? What is the necessity of thought? Are we overgeneralizing the necessity of thought? I said that thought is knowledge. In the psychological field, isn't that a date image? What I knew yesterday, I carried over to today. What I know today, I'm planning to carry it over to tomorrow. So all the things, all the time, what I'm doing, bringing the date image, the pictures that my mind has conjured into the future a long time. So that was the first roadblock. The second roadblock is time itself. The most obvious question will be, can we live without time? Of course not. Because as we are living as human beings, we need time. And that is the time of the clock. That is the chronological time. But we pay so much of attention, so much of feeling and emotion to time, that we say that like chronological time, psychological time is also as important. So what is this psychological time? From what is to what should be. To become, to be better, to have a better society, to get rid of all the problems, everything which is in the future is the psychological time. Where is the future? It is only up in my mind, in my imagination. So the psychological time of past and future, they're both created by my imagination. And because they are created by my imagination, they are not factual. They are illusions. Time is another name for hope and despair. We try to run after hope and to run away from despair. So all this is made up by the illusory structure of the mind, pretending that the future will be like this, and let me plan for the future. With time and thought, another factor comes in, which is, I think, is very important, is will, desire. We can do it. I will do it. I will achieve. I will attain. All these things are in the span of will. We have been taught right from childhood. This is a part of the education from family, from school, from the society. Unless you desire something, you cannot do anything. The whole academic system has given so much of importance to will, to develop your willpower so that you can do something, achieve. And that very sense of will, which is an urge to do, to achieve, to attain, that is creating all the mischief in the world. Talking about the problems, somebody's will has created the problem today. And we think that my will change the problem. So the will that has created the problem and the will that is planning to change the problem into a solution are not quite different essentially. So the change we are talking about is never going to happen unless the whole consciousness is transformed. So time, thought, and will or desire together, they're brought up into one word, which is the self, the me, and the I. The problems are not there as long as I is not there. I is the creator of problems. My desire, my wish, I want to do, I want to get. And again, that I is trying to do something on the problem. So that is the irony of change. So thought, time, and will, which is also effort, they are all converge into one thing called the me and the I. Let's inquire for a second. So, is there a movement which is completely devoid of me and the self? Yes. So, we must act. But what is that action? What is that right action which is not an action of the will, not an action of the self, time, knowledge, desire? What is that action? Is it awareness? Just to be aware without having any of the personal aspects working on what we see, what we perceive. It is the right question to ask what is the right action, but it will be audacious on my part to say what the right action is, because I am myself behind the roadblocks. It'll be hypocritical and not very honest on my part to say this is the right action. So I would suggest let's read a small quote by Kay, what he says about right action. I'm reminded of a story in Aesop's fable, The Boy with the Filberts. That little boy wants to grab some filberts from the jar, and he puts his hand inside the jar, grabs a handful of filberts, and tries to take out his hand. But he can't, because the hand is full. Unless he releases his hand, everything drops. He cannot take his hand out. So, is that what has happened of the human mind? The self? We have grabbed so much information, desire, will, that we cannot take our hands or take ourselves out of this position. So, is it so that the real transformation is ending the self? And I would suggest that I too would listen to a short audio clip from Kay in this context.
I have gathered tremendous information, knowledge. And that knowledge is the past. All knowledge is the past. There is no future knowledge. There is no present knowledge. Please listen to all this. There is only knowledge as the past. And knowledge is time. Are you following all this? Now I say to myself, I know this. And also, by careful, objective, non-personal observation of the world, I see there must be total change in me as a human being. Not only in my relationship with another, however intimate, my relationship with a man 10,000 miles away, my relationship with my neighbor, with human beings. I see there's a battle, conflict, misery. Always asserting myself, the selfish activity, the self-centered movement. That's all knowledge. Now, what place has it in the human transformation, which the mind sees also is absolutely necessary? So that's the question. Will future experience, gathering more knowledge, not only go to the moon and to various other fields of knowledge, but also the knowledge of myself, gathering more and more and more, taking time, will that bring about change? That is, will time and knowledge is time, will that bring transformation in me, in you? Or quite a different kind of energy is demanded? This is a problem we're going to discuss. You haven't, right? Are we meeting each other? Because, as we said, we are sharing the thing together. and to share something together, you need both need a relationship of affection, consideration, inquiry. Right? Otherwise you can't share. We must both be interested in the thing we are sharing together. Which means sharing together at the same time, at the same level, with the same intensity. Otherwise you can't share it. Right? So I have this problem. You have this problem. We know a great deal what others have said about us and what we also know about ourselves. And will that bring about change? That means, will thought change the human mind? You understand? Thought being the response of knowledge. Thought has created this world, right? Thought has divided the people as the Christians and the non-Christians, as the Arab and the Jew, as the Catholic and the non-Catholic, the communist and the Hindu. It divided people. Thought has done this. Are you aware of it? Thought has divided the world as Switzerland, France, Germany, Russia, and all the rest. Thought has brought about conflict between each other. Not only religiously, socially, economically, but also in our relationships. And we are looking to thought to change us. That's what we are doing, aren't we? You may not be conscious of it, but actually that's what we're trying to do. Is the picture clear? Not my picture, but the picture. That thought, knowledge, time, which are all the same. Time, knowledge, thought has brought about this world with all its confusion, misery, corruption, sorrow, pain, out there and also in here. And we say it all must change. Serious people say that. But they employ thought to bring about a change. You understand? So, I question the whole thing. I see very clearly that knowledge cannot change. Knowledge cannot change my activity, my self-centered movement of you and me as two separate entities fighting each other. So what am I to do? You understand? Do put this question to yourself in all seriousness. And what is your answer?
There's nothing to say and nothing to think after this. Thank you.
Is it out of curiosity? Nothing better to do? I'm asking these questions most respectfully, not in any sense of impudence. Are we here to be stimulated, to be challenged, to have more energy or release energy, or merely intellectual flirtation? A good word. Or romantically, sentimentally, or some kind of help, wanting to be helped by another. If one put all these questions to oneself, what would be our answer? You might just as well ask the speaker why he is talking. Is it a habit? Is it he feels happy facing an audience, fulfilling, and that he needs an audience? All these questions must not only put to oneself but also to the speaker. And if we explore into that why we are doing what we are doing, with all this trouble, travail, and the anxiety and fear of all life, and if one doesn't find an answer, why the speaker is going on the various continents talking for the last 60, 70 years, is it a habit to him? He has tested it out. kept quiet for a year and more. And also, at one time, he talked behind a curtain to the audience, and he felt rather silly. And so he went before the audience. He has tested this out very carefully, whether he depends on another to fulfill, to be, to become, to feel famous, all that nonsense. Why, in his return, he's asking you, if he may respectfully, why we are all here. Is it old age? Because we have nothing else better to do? Is it that we really deeply want to understand ourselves? Is only acting as a mirror in which each one of us can see ourselves as we are. Not be depressed or elated to discover what we are. Is it that mirror, clear, sharp, every feature of it is so, there is without any distortion? And if that mirror is clear and you see oneself exactly as one is, then the mirror is not important. You can break the mirror without feeling any lack of luck. And if we can answer that question, it's rather serious. Why we behave as we do, as each one of us does, why we think in certain pattern, why we follow somebody, the crazier the better. Why we store up all the things that one has said, that others have said. Why there is nothing in ourselves that is ourselves. And to discover what we are, that ourselves, what deep-rooted seed, not only the cultural seed, the traditional, the religious, all the outgrowth of all that, but go very, very, very deeply in oneself to find out the origin of all things, not the cells and all that.
I've been asked to speak first. Thank you, Nandini. That was marvelous. You opened up the subject beautifully. And I was particularly intrigued with your roadblocks. And it reminded me of something that happened in this room in the 70s. Krishnamurti met with a group of students from San Bernardino State University. And in the course of that discussion. It wasn't a dialogue, it was a discussion. In the course of it, he said, "Why do you accept problems?" He said, I would refuse problems. And then he went into that refusal, essentially saying, all your roadblocks, time, thought, knowledge, self. He said, in an instant, I would see all of that, and I would refuse it. So it was startling that you could, without time, see the whole of it and just refuse to accept it. Do you think he was realistic? Do you think he was unreasonable? Remember, he's talking to young people.
I would say that we have been used to making a problem of everything. Whatever we see, either we like it or dislike it. Either we try to continue it or to change it. There is a problem, which means a problem means we want to act on that. So definitely the approach itself is wrong, because we think something is over there and we want to do something about it. So the roadblocks, which is nothing other than the self, which comprises time, knowledge, desire, thought, it is a real. But the problem is that we don't see it as a roadblock. We only see the image of the roadblock again through the mind. So I can see logically that the roadblocks do exist, and the problems can be touched, or the incidents can be touched without the help of time, knowledge, effort, and thought.
But to see that all instantly, quickly, it requires a tremendous awareness, sensitivity.
Awareness of what?
Awareness of all these factors, the falsity of time, falsity of thought, knowledge, seeing all of that, but seeing it so quickly means you've already gone into it. You know it. You have a sense of it. So to see it all, reject it all in an instant, I question.
I would add one word to the things you've said: seriousness. Unless one is tremendously serious, as though my own house is burning, that kind of seriousness, the mind is always idle and is taking the road of blocks, thinking. So when the house is burning, there is no time to think. So is there a mind which is actually serious, and therefore it can see? Therefore the awareness happens. And awareness is not something in time. It's not from moment to moment or a continuous awareness. Awareness is just which defies time.
You brought up the trap of that, because I can see someone hearing that and saying, okay, I have to be serious, or I have to be on fire, realize I'm on fire, which brings forth perhaps desire, effort, will. Now, you made a good distinction, I thought, in your talk about the difference between change and transformation, right? That change is something I will try to do, and I'll try to reform myself into a new form based on hope or ideals and stuff like that. But transformation implies something that is totally new. Just go with that word. Now, of course, the book is called The Urgency of Change, which I'm suggesting when you buy that book, it's a great book. It's such a good book. It's a question and answer that I, for a long time, thought Krishnamurti wrote the questions and the answers, because the questions are so good. But then I think later we learned it's Alan Naudet, right?
Right.
Right. So you scratch out change and you write the urgency of transformation. So what is serious? I would like to bring in another word, freedom. What is without time? What is without having to understand 20 things before you can be aware of something? What did Krishnamurti say was at the very first step? Freedom, right? And that seems like, well, wait a minute, I'm so full of stuff, how can I be free? And you talked about people wanting people to be unconditionally free, but just for fun, I'd like to bring up the idea of conditional freedom. That there is freedom right now, regardless of content of consciousness, like which you spoke about, time, knowledge, all of that. As long as there's not a second thing trying to condition the conditioning, which would be the me trying to control, say, I don't like anger, I don't like my jealousy, or I can solve my envy, then that is in this moment free, because the nature of this moment of consciousness is freedom. Regardless of content or no content. So I'm just bringing up the idea of conditional freedom being that crucial understanding first and then element of awareness that is not impeding to change, but is allowing, for a transformative awareness of what is, rather than looking at it and not liking it or liking it. Same difference, Freedom.
Whatever I'm saying or you are saying, these are all our opinions, right? We are coming from something. Whatever I say, I'm coming from some place which I've gathered. I think if we really look at the word freedom, it cannot be conditional freedom. Because freedom means having no pressure, no burden of any sort, of any kind. Be it the pressure of my knowledge, be it the pressure of time, or my want, or my desire, be it anything. The moment we say freedom is conditional, I would like to question that. To me, freedom is absolutely a state where the mind is not operating under any kind of burden.
But if it is, then it's an impossibility. So I'm saying it has to first be what it is. You can't say, then you were projecting what freedom is and trying to make a path towards it. But I'm saying there is freedom actually I'm not saying it, he said it, at the very first step, his opinion, my opinion, that allows what is to be, allows it in a sense to be free. In other words, even though it's what we're calling knowledge and time and gives birth to effort and all of that, it has to be untouched by this observation. What he really taught was observation, right? And what was the qualities of observation? What it's not interfered by, judgment, comparison, blah, blah, blah. That's freedom. To be what is. And then, meet it. How else would you meet it other than if you had a reason to get rid of it? And then go beyond it. But don't worry about going beyond it. It's all the learning we're talking about happens in that space. Everything else, we're just explaining it or describing it or understanding it, which is fine. I love that stuff too. And it's necessary, but the actual challenge of freedom is one of these ironies that it's like, why is it a challenge to be free?
There is another thing it comes to my mind. We start with reading K, or we listen to a talk or a video, then we think of freedom. How about this if we, without any compulsion or any desire, just observe ourselves and see that we do not have that state of freedom?
Or we do.
Okay, or we do.
You can't be directional and you're looking, otherwise you're saying, I'm going to look at myself and see that I'm not free. That's already said and done. It's a prescription.
Yes.
But just to look.
Yes.
There might be free.
We might be, yes. The possibility I said is always there.
It's
Only
not
the
a
possibility has to be touched. So I think the right kind of thinking, I don't say it is the right as opposed to wrong, but the kind of thinking that is necessary is just observing what is going on inside and outside. That very observation leads to ultimately, probably, I don't know, I'm not yet there. So that probably leads to a state where the mind is completely in a different state of being.
Why are we'll say, not there?
Is it that we don't want to be there?
Why would we not want to have
Because
ice cream sundaes every day, which is what freedom is, equated with or something?
I have thought about like what I have experienced in myself. I think I'm scared, fear. I want to be secured, and I think that my thought is providing me that security. I don't want to get rid of my thought. Thinking protects me. I want to be protected.
That holds us very, very deeply.
You said the root of something was consciousness. The root of, what was it? The root of conflict?
I said the common factor of mind is consciousness.
Yes.
Which is the common human consciousness.
Does that consciousness, which takes place, and by consciousness you mean content like thinking consciousness, not like pure consciousness? Right?
No.
Yeah. Does that takes place in the brain? It's a physiological chemical process. Does that inherit or assume something from the body that compels it to not be able to answer the question of why would I not want to be free and respond because of fear? What is it that's the body? Is there something in the body that's compelling, that compels the body in a proper way, but also now compels this me, which is past, present, and looking into the future towards death? Is there something in the physiological, again, that works for the body? I'm just saying there's this blind spot. We know all this stuff, but why isn't it happening then? Well, is there a blind spot, that I haven't? Because of fear. But that's not the last question. The last question, well, why fear? Why do we take fear as the end of our inquiry? Because you mentioned it.
Yes. Could it be conditioning? Like we have inherited all these aspects from the common evolution of man. I'm sorry. So could it be conditioning, which is a deep psychological, besides the physiological conditioning, the deep psychological conditioning according to which the mind operates? Seeing that it is the conditioning, just seeing begins that possibility of cracking through it.
You're just realizing it's there.
Mm-hmm.
Like we're so habituated, you're saying, through the eons at this point. It's like a veil, opaque for most of us, unless we question, unless we go into this.
You know why? Because when we question, we are not in that conditioning. The moment of questioning, the mind is in a completely different state. Because when we are thinking, the mind is acting according to the pattern.
When you brought up, in the word I was sort of pushing towards, is will. You brought up will and associate it with consciousness and thought and all that. But doesn't the body have will to be and to survive in a naturally protective thing for the body, which doesn't involve fear, it just involves action, right? Will.
Can the body be interfered? I don't think so.
No, I'm saying that the body has it naturally. Plant has it, the animals have it, this will to survive, which gets them out of dangerous situations, fight, flight, and now freeze we use.
You mean instinct?
No, just using the word will.
Will.
And then does that infuse now, since now the thinking process is part of the physical body, now that has a will to survive. It's coming seemingly intelligently, quote unquote, from the body, but it's coming to this thing that we created out of nothing, literally, out of thinking. From day one, you know, when we weren't thinking, till year 5 and year 20 or whatever. Now it's there. And it has this will attached from the body, or it's attached to the body actually, to survive. I'm just thinking, what is this blind spot that we listened to him and we didn't fully or did fully get it? Could it be, and he's talking about death and dying to that known, the knowledge. And there's a huge resistance in will to die, even psychologically. I mean, psychological death is equal to physical death to itself, dying now. Love and death, freedom, all these things are destructive. He uses them as they're destructive, and they would initiate fear. That is the response of will in the psyche, because it cannot act.
Unless Mark wants to say something.
No, I'm waiting for you, my dear.
We only have 3 minutes left, so we got to go quickly.
2 minutes,
Sorry.
So I think the only thing that we can do is see that the whole thing is an illusion, and still then we bank on that illusion. Illusion means having no substance.
But we have
My
to see
will
that.
doesn't have that substance. And when the me sees that, it releases its hands, and all the filberts drop down. The hands are free. I think.
No, I just feel that you're taking the subject of change and so carefully exposing it, looking at all of its dimensions, gives us many open doors, many things to go into, and you've expressed it in simple language, and I appreciate your not just using Krishnamurti, but your own insight. So for that, I appreciate your approach to it, and you've given us a great deal to contemplate.
Thank you.